So this is Kensington Kids, part 2. Coming to court. Imagine. Imagine you're a rich farmer from Somerset. A visit to the King George II at Kensington Palace is the most important day of your life. You dress carefully in your finest lace ruffles and new coat, bowing and scraping as you enter the king's drawing room. The drawing room was a regular court event where the king mingled with his subjects. A lady and gentleman dressed up in the court for a court occasion is what you see at the top there in the middle. Aching legs is what it says in the little red circle. Ladies in waiting were not allowed to sit down or fold their arms. How long could you stand and not fold your arms? The little cartoon at the bottom says, "But I have a new suit." And you see the guards there. They say, "No entry, sir." Two fierce guards holding halberds, which are big pikes with axe blades on the top, stand at the entrance. If they don't like your clothes, that coat is so last year, they'll clash their halberds together in front of your nose. "No entry, you're out, sir." It might be a good idea to bring a bag of gold with you to buy your way in instead. The drawing room is crammed full of courtiers. There is nowhere to sit, and much of the conversation is in French. You will need to push your way into the group of people waiting to speak to the king. If you're very lucky, one of the court officers will introduce you to His Royal Highness. Remember how to bow and kiss his hand. What you see over here is a crowded drawing room in the mid-18th century with the latest court fashions. Tam O'Shanter and his nephew, Tomahawi, in 1734, are beneath there, which we're going to get to in just a minute. So, in French, which I don't speak, but your Aunt Andrea does, so she could probably do this better. They're saying, "Hello, miss." And she says, "I need to sit down." It's a visit like no other. You see these two people, Tam O'Shanter and Tomahawi? If you were in the palace in August of 1734, you might have witnessed a great spectacle as King George received a party of chiefs from the Creek tribe of Native Americans in the presence chamber. Tam O'Shanter, their king, and his men had their faces most hideously painted in black and red so thick that at a distance they look like masks. That's what somebody wrote about it. They made a speech that no one could understand and presented King George II with animal skins and sticks with feathers on them as a sign of peace. Do you think the king really understood what they were doing? But I bet he remembered it. It made the book, didn't it? Curious clothes. The little cartoon at the top there says, "Help, I'm stuck." Do you think you could turn up to the palace in your jeans and trainers? That's what they call sneakers. Certainly not. Lords and ladies spent vast sums of money making themselves smart for court. Here are some of the strange things that you would have to wear. Underneath the little cartoon bubble, it says, "Manturas were extremely uncomfortable and very difficult to move in." We're going to learn what they are. Lavish for ladies. First, your maids squeeze and then sew you into a heavy dress called a mantura. The skirts are spread over whalebone hoops, so enormous you have to go through doors sideways. Then you'll need fancy piled up hair or a wig. To hold it all in place, use a good helping of starch, flour, sweat, powder, lead, or dandruff. Make sure it's decorated as much as possible with feathers, trimmings, fruit, and flowers. You can use all sorts of trinkets, even a model ship. Do you see that ship in her hair? Powder your face. Use white lead mixed with egg white topped with rouge and cherry lips. Don't worry if the lead might poison you. And then stick on beauty spots in shape of dots, stars, or hearts, but don't mix up the spot code or you'll end up in trouble. One near your mouth means you're a flirt. One on your right cheek means you're married. And then carry a fan. This is vital for passing secret signals to the gentlemen of the court. Now, gorgeous for gents. Buy an expensive silk suit. Make sure it's really colorful, worn with a fancy lace-frilled shirt. Carry a sword. Don't worry if you've forgotten. You can hire one at the palace. Always wear a powdered wig. Remember to shake out the nits, bugs, and spiders before you put it on. Don't forget to carry a flat hat under your arm. Remember, this flat hat is a fake. No one brings a real hat to court in case they accidentally put it on and disrespect the king. And don't bother washing for court. No one worries about being clean. It'll be pretty sweaty in there, so you might want to carry a perfume tanky in case it gets too stinky. Then it says about the picture at the top, detail of a gentleman's court waistcoat, which is like a vest in the 1850s. And then style tip, for special court occasions such as the king's birthday, men would put on makeup. I think this guy on the right is shaking out the nits and spiders and things out of somebody's wig. Marvelous manners. The manners courtiers had to follow were very complicated and to modern folk very strange. Forget your manners and you risk being sent away from court forever. Party pooper is what the round thing says. At court, everyone thought King George I very dull because he hardly spoke. He was actually very shy. The golden rules of King George I's gorgeous court. Which of the following were not real Georgian court rules? Do not speak in English. The king and his courtiers will only talk to you in French. If the king speaks to you, your favor goes up. If he turns his back on you, this is a snub, and it means you are a person of no importance to the court. If you see a chair, sit down. If the king appears, the whole court must sink down in a graceful bow. If you're a lady, do not leave the court without curtsying 3 times to the king. You must then walk backwards out of his royal presence. Number 6, do not leave the royal presence without permission, even if you need to pee. It's better to pee on the floor than to insult their highnesses by leaving the court. Ladies are not allowed to cross their arms in front of the queen. So, which of those do you think are not? The answer is number 3. All the rules are real except number 3. There were no chairs at court in case anyone was rude enough to sit down in the king's presence. Number 6 was such a strict rule. That's the one about even if you need to pee, you can't leave. Such a strict rule, one poor lady who was dying to go for a wee had to go on the floor. She made a puddle as big as a dining table, while all the ladies around her whose dresses were getting wet pretended not to notice. A very public snub. If King George II didn't like someone, he turned his back or rump on them. So many people were snubbed that they got together and formed the Rump Steak Club. When the king heard this, he was furious. "Are you laughing at me?" he asked. And don't panic, girls. Some ladies carried a tiny bordelu or chamber pot, which they popped under their dresses for a quick wee. One courtier complained about the French ambassador's wife who peed in front of everyone at least 10 times a day. That picture that looks like a gravy boat at the bottom, that's what that is. Oh dear, just a wee mistake. Colorful characters. Among the hundreds who worked at court were many curious characters, some of them from faraway lands. The rat catcher. William Hester, who was employed by William III and Mary II to catch and kill the palace rats, cut a fine figure when he swaggered around in his rich velvet cloak. Embroidered on his arms of his cloak were wheat sleeves and sheaves and rats. On the back were the royal crowns. Hester was so important, he had a new cloak every year. See the little rat on the little circle? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Turkish servants were a status symbol at court, and George I had two. Muhammad, see the opposite, and Mustafa. At the bottom, it says, "What's the weather like up there?" Because Ulrich Jory was a Polish dwarf comedian with a deafening voice who was given as a gift to George I. He was taught English and painting at the king's expense, but was a rather wild character. And once he spent the night locked up in the hole or punishment room at Kensington Palace for upsetting a maid. Uh-oh. Muhammad, keeper of the king's closet. And this is his picture. Do you see the arrow? The top arrow coming down? Muhammad's, true to the king, was a Turk captured in battle against the Ottoman Empire. His jobs included dressing King George I, and he had the privilege of washing his clothes. He was grand enough to have his own servants and a private tutor for his son, and he slept in a four-poster bed with scarlet and lace trimmings. And the other picture, the arrow points to a little boy. His name was Peter the Wild Boy. Perhaps the most curious character at court was a strange boy of about 12 who was discovered in a German forest, naked and walking on all fours like a monkey. When approached, he scampered up a tree. The grass-eating wild boy was given to King George, who named him Peter. He was brought to England and became a court pet. This timid boy never learnt polite manners, would refuse to bow to the king, and would pick the courtiers' pockets searching for nuts. Peter eventually left court and went to live with a kind farmer. Balls and banquets. The finest food and drink were served at Kensington Palace, but the royal diners often had to put up with being watched by crowds of hungry spectators. Come on, the party's not over yet. That's what the bubble says. The picture near the middle says sometimes over 1,000 guests danced the night away at Kensington Palace. William III and Mary II held many glittering balls at Kensington Palace. In one held in January of 1694, the staircases shone with lanterns and candles as guests danced until dawn. When they weren't working up a sweat on the ballroom floor, they drank beer, mead, ale, cider, port, and wine, and feasted on pastries, nuts, meat, and fish. There were huge quantities of food and drink that were served to the hungry guests. Every Sunday, King George II and his family would dine on tables placed in the middle of a hall surrounded by benches packed with sightseers. It was like feeding time at the Royal Zoo for those who queued for hours to watch the king and queen eat their leg of lamb. One courtier described the crowd as very dirty and noisy. It was a terrible bore for the nobles, including the lady of the bedchamber, who had to kneel down for hours tasting the royal food for poison. Once, so many people came to see their majesties eat their dinner that the rail protecting the royals broke. And the onlookers fell onto the table. The courtiers wrote that the king and queen laughed most heartily. None for you lot. Here's what they ate at one summer dinner in 1735. Beef, chicken and mushrooms, mutton mashed in a loaf, veal and fried sweetbread, pullets, which are chickens, and cream, a hunch of venison, cold chicken and pickles, peas and cucumber, lobster, gooseberry and apricot tart, smoked salmon, and prawns. Do you think you have enough protein there? A lot, huh? However, not all of Kensington's royal residents enjoyed such lavish meals. During her childhood at the palace, Princess Victoria could only be found at 7 o'clock every evening, eating her bread and milk out of a small silver basin. That's not very nice, huh? So let's find out more about her. Growing up at Kensington Palace. Oops, I have to find the page. There we go. Generations of royal children have grown up in Kensington Palace, including the modern Princes William and Harry. What you're seeing on the left is the King's Gallery. William, Duke of Gloucester, which is the picture on the left, son of Anne, who later became queen, lived near Kensington Palace and often visited his doting uncle, King William III, who had no children of his own. The young boy drilled his toy soldiers in great regiments over the floor of the King's Gallery, and King William happily joined in the games. Though sickly, the young Duke also had a troop of 90 boys who he trained just like real soldiers in the palace gardens. For Queen Mary's birthday in the spring of 1694, the 5-year-old Duke and his men marched armed with wooden swords and muskets, paraded in front of the king and queen, much to their delight. King George III's 5 daughters all stayed at Kensington with their stuffy grandfather, George I, and later with their parents. Life at court was a bit dull, but at least they had lots of beautiful clothes. 192 pair of gloves a year and a new pair of shoes every week. To the right, that picture you see of the girls is Princess Anne, Princess Amelia, and Princess Caroline, the daughters of George III. The princesses were taught music by the famous composer George Frederick Handel. Their brother, Prince William, had a laboratory at the house for his science studies and printing press, which he and his sisters were taught to use. In the circle underneath the girls' pictures, it says divas. George III's daughters each had 5 servants to boss around. And he had how many daughters? 5? That's a lot of servants. Then underneath there, you see another picture that looks more modern, right? More recently, 21st century royals, Princes William and Harry, grew up at Kensington Palace with their mother, Diana. They went to a nearby school and spent many happy hours zooming around the palace corridors and playing with the chauffeur's dog on the green outside. So what you see on the left is Prince William and Harry in their apartment at Kensington Palace. A palace princess. Princess Victoria had a lonely and often difficult childhood at Kensington Palace, but it was here that she met the man of her dreams. On the left, you see Princess Victoria and her mother, the Duchess of Kent. In the cartoon at the bottom, it says, I will be good next time. I'll do my homework. So the baby girl who grew up to become Queen Victoria was born in Kensington Palace on the 24th of May, 1819, and did not have a very amusing childhood. She was brought up using the Kensington system, an elaborate and strict set of rules made up by her mother and court official Sir John Conroy in an attempt to control her. On the right, the drawing that you see is a self-portrait that Princess Victoria created when she was only 8. When the young princess became queen, Sir John thought he would be very powerful, but his wicked plans were dashed. Instead of squashing Victoria, all those hateful rules made her stronger, and when she became queen, Conroy was out. In the picture you see, the statue of Queen Victoria was made by her daughter, Princess Louise. Some rules she had to obey. Meaning Princess Victoria when she was a girl. She was not allowed her own bedroom, but she had to sleep with her mother until she was 18. She was not allowed to walk down the stairs without someone holding her hand. She was not allowed to be friends with other children. She was only allowed to see visitors with her mother or governors present. She was only allowed to eat boiled chicken and bananas. Actually, the last one's made up, but the others are true. A very naughty princess. Princess Victoria's main companion was her governess, Baroness Lezen, who from 1860 kept a behavior book. The poor princess had also to describe her own behavior. In September 1832, she wrote in the behavior book, "I was very, very, very horribly naughty," and each very was underlined many times, but in her own diary that day, she didn't mention having been naughty. That's a picture of her writing it at the bottom, right? And at the top, you see Princess Victoria hearing the news that she is now queen. Victoria must have been one of the loneliest girls in the land, with only her pets and her dolls for company. Just 11 years old when she discovered she would one day be queen, she solemnly vowed, "I will be good." She kept her promise, as you can tell from her diary. Opposite is an extract from it. Here is what the extract says. "Today is my birthday, Friday the 24th of May, 1833. Today is my birthday. I am today 14 years old. How very old! I awoke 5:30 and got up 7:30. At 2:30 came the royal family. The queen gave me a pair of diamond earrings from the king. Later, I went to a ball in my honor. I danced with my cousin George Cambridge, and then Prince George Lieven, and then Lord Brooke, and then Lord March, and then Lord Anthony, and then with Lord Fitzroy Lennox, and then with Lord Emlyn, and was very much amused. As a teenager, Victoria must have dreamt of escaping the dreaded system and fleeing to the theater. She adored going to the ballet and the opera and filled her diary with details of the stars' costumes, which she copied for her dolls. She wrote of ballerina Marie Taglioni, who danced so beautifully as if she flew in the air. Another of her favorites, the charming opera singer Luigi Lambashi, gave her singing lessons at Kensington Palace, which began when she was 17 and continued after she became queen. When Victoria was just 16, her relations began looking for a husband for her. When she caught sight of her cousin Albert, who's the guy in the picture in the middle, at Kensington Palace, she was very impressed. She wrote, "He is extremely handsome. His hair is about the same as mine, his eyes large and blue, and he has a beautiful nose and very sweet mouth with fine teeth." When she became Queen Victoria, she proposed to Prince Albert. She thought he never would dare now that she was queen. In the bottom in the middle, you see something that you see on wedding cakes many times today, but this was the very first time ever. Victoria and Albert's wedding cake was the first to have a tiny model of the happy couple on top. It set a fashion trend for newlyweds for centuries to come. They're the ones who thought of it first. And that is the end of part 2.